Hello again, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about testimony. Epistemology, the question is, what is the role that other people play in what we know? We don't come to know things all by ourselves. We take the word of other people for a lot of the things we know. So in social epistemology, a lot of questions will be asked about trust. Whom do we trust? Why do we trust them? When do we misplace our trust? And especially for today, questions about systematically misplaced trust, ways we continually or regularly, systematically make mistakes in whom we trust or don't trust, and what influence that has on what we then know. Today's reading is the first chapter of Miranda Fricker's book, Epistemic Injustice, The Power and Ethics of Knowing, and this first chapter is about testimonial injustice. Our goal for today is to understand testimonial injustice. What is it and what's so problematic about it? What's so morally wrong about it? That's our goal. To do that, however, we can't start with testimonial injustice. Fricker wants to start somewhere else. Instead, we need to begin with power, specifically social power. We're not talking about mechanical power or electrical power, but social power. Fricker starts this way. She says, social power is a capacity we have as social agents to influence how things go in the social world. So first off, think for yourself, how are you able to influence other pieces of society? This can be big, this can be little. If you have a social media account, that's a form of social power. You're exerting influence on others. If you talk to someone else, that's a form of social power. A lot of the actions you perform are examples of social power because you do them to influence the behavior of other people. Me explaining this chapter to you is a form of social power. I'm influencing you and your ability to understand this material. Now, Fricker says social power can operate two different ways. It can operate actively or passively. She gives as an example of active social power. The idea here is someone has to actually act to have the influence. So she gives an example of a traffic warden. Now you got to remember, Fricker is English, so her example is, well, very English. Traffic warden, we might say traffic cop, someone who goes around and can write parking tickets. A traffic warden, a traffic cop, has active social power when he or she writes a ticket or imposes a fine on someone for their driving or for where they've parked. But social power can also be passive. That is to say, the person with the power didn't actually have to do anything to influence other people. So for instance, even if a traffic warden were out sick, you would park in parking spots instead of on the grass because of the mere fact that the traffic warden could write you a ticket for parking on the lawn. Even if they don't actually do it, their mere presence, the possibility of them acting, influences you. That's passive social power. They didn't actually have to do anything. Now, she also says that this idea of social power can be divided in a second way. Not only is there active and passive social power, there's also agential social power and purely structural social power. Agential power is when an agent does a thing or could do a thing. You are an agent. Anyone who does something or could do something is an agent. Now, this is how we normally think of social power. So if you post on social media, for instance, that's a form of agential social power. But she says there's also purely structural. Quote, by contrast, power can also operate purely structurally, so that there is no particular agent exercising it. End quote. The idea being that people can still be influenced. Our behaviors can be influenced. We'll act differently, a little or a lot, even though no one caused us to act differently. For example, she says, a given social group is informally disenfranchised. That doesn't mean they don't vote. But not because there's a law, it's informal. A given social group is informally disenfranchised in the sense that, for whatever complex social reasons, they tend not to vote. I don't know, like maybe young people, for instance, who vote at the lowest rate of anyone in our society. Back to the text. No social agent or agency in particular is excluding them from the democratic process, yet they are excluded, and their exclusion marks an operation of social power. Something is influencing these people to not go vote, but no one's telling them they can't. There's not a law saying they can't that was written by someone. Nevertheless, somehow they're being influenced to not go vote, even though no one is doing it. This is purely structural social power. Now, lastly, on this issue of social power, she says that power relationships are dependent upon coordination with social others and are in that sense socially situated. The idea is social power doesn't just exist in a vacuum. For someone to have social power, someone else has to agree for them to have some social power. She develops this thought this way. It says, any given power relationship will also have a more significant direct dependence on coordination with the actions of some social others in particular. She mentions, for example, the power that a university teacher has over her students. I'm your professor. I have some power over you. I don't mean that rudely, I just mean the fact that I have the ability to set assignments and give grades, and that influences your behavior. You're actually doing the assignments and watching this video. I've influenced you. That's social power. But why do I have this power? How do I have it? Where does it come from? Through the coordination with other people. This power, she says, is broadly dependent upon the whole social context of university institutions and systems of grading. Universities have to exist, and there has to be this established concept of professors being able to assign grades. If universities didn't exist, or if there weren't this system of giving out grades based on what you do, I wouldn't have the same power over you as I would otherwise. But it's not just that. She says it's also more directly dependent upon the coordination with the actions of a narrow class of social others. For instance, the potential employers who take notice of grades. If no employer cared about grades, then my power over you would be directly diminished. I've never met these employers that are going to want to know if you passed your college classes. Nevertheless, they are coordinating with me, and that coordination is the reason that professors have power to influence students' behavior. To sum up some of this stuff on social power then, she says, the point of any operation of social power is to affect social control, whether it is a matter of particular agents controlling what other agents do, or of people's actions being controlled purely structurally. Social power is about affecting social control, affecting how things go in the social world. Now she puts all this together in one definition. Social power, that is, a practically socially situated capacity to control others' actions, where this capacity may be exercised actively or passively by particular social agents, or alternatively, it may operate purely structurally. That's taking everything we just went over and shrinking it down into one sentence. Now, with social power out of the way, Frigger wants to talk about identity power. She says, but there is at least one form of social power which requires not only practical social coordination, but also an imaginative social coordination. Okay, first things to note on this. The thing she's going to be talking about here, identity power, is a kind of social power. Social power encompasses a lot. A particular kind of social power is identity power, and it requires a certain coordination, a particular kind of coordination, one of imagination. To keep going with this explanation, she says, there can be operations of power which are dependent upon agents having shared conceptions of social identity, conceptions alive in the collective social imagination that govern, for instance, what it is or means to be a woman or a man, or what it means to be gay or straight, young or old, and so on. Whenever there is an operation of power that depends in some significant degree upon such shared imaginative conceptions of social identity, then identity power is at work. Okay, a lot to unpack there. First, we need to talk about this idea of social imagination. Now, I want you to look at the following and tell me what it is. What is this? If you answered a piece of paper, you're correct, but I'm guessing that wasn't what you answered. You probably said, it's $1. Well, who's right? Am I right or are you? Is it a piece of paper or is it $1? Well, we're both right, but we're saying different things. To say it's $1, you're correct, but it's only $1 because we say it's $1. That is to say that this kind of paper is $1 and not just any other kind of paper, because the concept of $1 is a social construct. We have imagined together this thing called $1, and it exists because we collectively as a society say it exists. If we all stopped saying there were dollars, then there would no longer be any dollars. This would just be a piece of paper with the word $1 written on both sides. But it would just be a piece of paper. But it's $1 because we say it is. That's the nature of a social construct. The opposite of a social construct we could talk about is sort of a natural kind. To get a sense of what a natural kind is, as opposed to a social construct, consider the following question. If tails were called legs, how many legs would a donkey have? Think carefully about this question. I'll ask it again. If tails were called legs, how many legs would a donkey have? Now I'm going to guess you didn't say 2 or 3. You might say 1, you might say 4, or you might say 5. You got your answer? Well, the correct answer is 4. Some of you are saying, wait, what do you mean? Just because you call a tail a leg doesn't make it so. Tails and legs are not social constructs, they're natural kinds. They are what they are by their very nature. They aren't that because we call them that. You can call a tail a leg all day long. It's still not a leg. It's a tail. Now the question is, all this social identity stuff she was just talking about, are we talking about social constructs or natural kinds? The correct answer is social construct. What it means to be a man or a woman, gay or straight, young or old, these are social constructs. That is to say, how a man is supposed to act or how a woman is supposed to act, how old or young people are supposed to act and be and behave, gay or straight, racial identities, these are things we've constructed. For example, what counts as old? How you answer that question is a social construct. There's no natural kind out there that says, here is what is old. In fact, it's changed throughout human history as human life expectancy has gone up. How are old people or young people supposed to behave? Are young people supposed to be quiet and respect their elders? Are old people supposed to be in charge or quiet and leave the young people alone to do what they want? Your answer to all those questions, whatever they are, fine. The point is to say those are social constructs. There's nothing inherent about one's age that dictates by nature the answer to those questions. So, all that to say then, whenever there is an operation of power that depends in some significant degree upon shared imaginative conceptions of social identity, then identity power is at work. What she's saying here is identity power is social power that you have or lack because of your social identity. That is to say, man, woman, gay, straight, young, old, black, white, Asian, what have you. If you have some social power, that is to say, the ability to influence others, or if you lack it because specifically of your identity in any of these categories, then that is identity power. Now she gives an example here. An exercise of gender identity power is active, for instance, when a man makes, possibly unintended, use of his identity as a man to influence a woman's actions. For example, to make her defer to his words. So here she's going to use an example from The Talented Mr. Ripley, a book and also a movie with Matt Damon set in the 1950s with the gender stereotypes very much at play. She says, he might, for instance, patronize her and get away with it in virtue of the fact that he is a man and she is a woman. So in the story, this guy Greenleaf says, Marge, there's female intuitions and then there are facts. Marge is very suspicious of this Mr. Ripley, who in fact is totally not a good guy, and killed some people. Marge is suspicious. Greenleaf is writing off her suspicions because it's just female intuition, but he has the facts. By saying this and the fact that he's a man and she's a woman, he's telling her, shut up. The fact that he can do this because he's a man, and by the way, she couldn't as a woman in the 1950s, that is identity power. It's an exercise of identity power. His identity as a man gave him the ability to influence her in this way. Her identity does not give her that power. Let's keep looking at a few more examples of this. She says, but in another social setting, a man might not need to do anything to silence her. She might already be silenced by the mere fact that he is a man and she is a woman. So in the example above, that was active identity power, because Greenleaf had to do something to influence her, to get her to stop talking. But there can easily be cases where no one actually had to do anything to get someone with less power to stop talking, to be silent. That is passive, and it can also be purely structural. Whether an operation of identity power is active or passive, it depends very directly on the imaginative social coordination. Both parties must share the relevant collective conception of what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman, where such conceptions amount to stereotypes, which may or may not be distorting ones, about men and women's respective authority on this or that subject matter. Note that the operation of identity power does not require that either party consciously accept the stereotype as truthful. So imagine we have two people. One has a social identity that typically has less power. The second has a social identity that typically has more power. They both think this is bogus, that these social identities shouldn't work this way. There's no truth to the stereotypes. Nevertheless, those expectations are set. Both parties are still being influenced by them. Only if perhaps they both say to each other, I don't think these stereotypes are true, could the influence be broken. Here's a non-gender example, for instance. So remember Fricker's English. So she talks about English gentlemen. For instance, once upon a time, not so long ago, an English gentleman might have accused a member of the working classes of impudence or insolence or cheek if he spoke to him in a familiar manner. That is to say, if a worker spoke to an English gentleman, the English gentleman would say, "How dare you, sir?" and get the working man to shut up, because of the power that the gentleman has because of his social identity as a gentleman over the workman. The gentleman's identity carries with it a set of assumptions about how gentlemen are to be treated by different social types. And in virtue of these normative trappings, the mere identity category gentleman can reinforce the exercise of more material forms of social power. Here, by the way, she also puts in an example of a purely structural operation of identity power. We can imagine an informally disenfranchised group. Remember, this is the folks that aren't voting, not because there's a law saying they can't. We can imagine an informally disenfranchised group whose tendency not to vote arises from the fact that their collective imagined social identity is such that they are not the sort of people who go in for political thinking and discussion. That is to say, imagine a group of people who define themselves. We are the sort of people who don't vote. If you are a member of that group, then that definition of you as a group influences the individual's behavior to not go vote, because you want to stay part of the group, or you have to, and you want to behave as you're expected to. That's purely structural identity power. Now, why were we looking at all of this social power and identity power stuff? That's where we'll pick up next time. For today, I've talked enough. We've laid the groundwork for how Fricker understands power and identity power to be working, what they are and what they do. In the next video, next time, we'll start right here at this passage where she then takes all of this power talk and applies it to a social epistemology. What do we know based on power, relationships? We'll pick it up there next time. Until then, have a good rest of your day.